Welcome to Delmarvalous Americana. I'm your host, Billy Earl Amos. This weekly program aims to examine the voices, the sounds, and the personalities of those people whose labor of love is music and the arts. Whether it's a local favorite or a rising regional act, we'll spend some time with them and their music here on WSDL 90.7 FM. And you can also find us on YouTube channel and on Pac 14 in Salisbury. Because, as we all know, a life without live music just ain't hardly worth it. Let's all welcome our guest for today, Miss Nancy Mitchell, who is the Poet Laureate for the city of Salisbury, and a Texan and a music fan all in one. To hear some of the favorite songs of Nancy Mitchell, go to Delmarvalous Americana on YouTube.
With Nancy Mitchell, when did you first become aware of Ramsey's music?
Well, I think it was just always something that, well, my family, grew up in Texas. And then when I actually was, I'm trying to think, through my husband mainly, he lived in Brenham and was tuned into he introduced me to Lyle Lovett, and they were more, Texas people in a different, yeah. So I was, I was crazy about him, and I thought that he was an interesting songwriter. But as you say, what do you think of him?
I think he's incredibly gifted.
Yes.
He's an way above average singer. He's a very good guitar player. He's a magnificent songwriter and storyteller. I just don't think he's a guy that particularly likes public acclaim.
I know, it's hard to believe, isn't it? For people are always chasing that. Yeah, I think so. And as I mentioned, I think I mentioned to you before that we had this terrific writer come for Writers on the Shore. And I got this fellow, E.P. Jones, who wrote the most incredible book called The Known World. It's about E.P. Jones is Black, and he wrote about a Black slave owner, very poignant, amazing kind of novel, encompassing, amazing. And he didn't like public acclaim either. In fact, he only agreed to come if I'd pick him up and make sure that he had plenty of oysters to eat, and promised that he would not spend any time standing around with a bunch of professors crunching ice and talking. So those were my three conditions. That's like what it was. And he wasn't playing, and he was an introvert. And it was great for him not to be. He was from DC, and he wrote an incredibly amazing book of short stories about life in DC, in these neighborhoods. And he was living in a very nice apartment near the National Cathedral, and I'm sure he appreciated it, but that wasn't his world, and he was not interested in doing it. And we paid him a whole bunch of money too. So
right.
Somebody asked him, so what's next? What have you got coming next? He said, the next thing I'm going to do is answer your question and go hope what I think is a plate full of oysters. I'm going to finish up and be gone. So he didn't relish that. And I think some people do not. And I think it's exhausting for them. What might be invigorating for other musicians is not.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my hat's off to them for being able to recognize fame for the rather shallow existence that it is. But on the other hand, when I did have the occasion to talk to Ramsey on the telephone, and I was trying to get an interview with him, and his question was, why in God's name would you want to interview me? And I wasn't prepared for that question, so I didn't really have a good answer. If I were answering it now, I would say, well, I so enjoyed your first album, I would like to hear more.
Right.
And I'd like to talk to you about growing up in Highland Park. I'd like to talk to you about, your life in Texas and what your life is like now.
Mm-hmm. And I
but I
think,
didn't have that wherewithal.
yeah, and I think we're always interested in, the songs we love. How did you get there? Like, I have this incredible portrait by a student, Chinese exchange student, of Jin Xiao Kim. She's a wonderful artist at
Uh-huh.
professor at SU. It is the most poignant portrait. It's a self-portrait. And I said, gosh, his name is I think Chen. I said, what were you thinking about? He said, my girlfriend just told me I couldn't play any more video games for a week. And I thought the pain, and, this look of like suffering. And I thought there was going to be a story about getting out of China. And, so it's kind of like they're just people. It's like you just think, how could someone with a gift like this not have an incredible kind of story?
Right, right.
They're just, I had a Ellen Bryant Boyd, who was a great teacher, said, we are but the reed the wind blows through, which I think is beautiful, because it's like, it ain't about us, it comes through us.
Right. That's very smart. One of the things that I have always so enjoyed about poetry is the ability to take human thought and to synthesize it into a more elegant form of narrative than the typical person, certainly me, are capable of doing. It's a gift, and it's a body of work that really kind of transcends a lot of different types of art, certainly television as we know it. I'm a big fan of the theater, and all forms of music I'm a big fan of, even including opera, big opera fan. But there's something about poetry that is unique and fascinating because of its extremely personal nature.
I think it's also one of the interesting things about poetry. It's made up of language, which we use all the time. It's a medium that is available to everyone. But I think also it depends on things like, it depends on sound, it depends on rhythm, and it depends on being able to articulate the most accurate and precise image of an emotion, to tether an abstract emotion to a concrete image. I think of Percy Sledge, because my students would always write things like, I loved her more than anything in the world. I said, oh, that's terrible. Come on, you got to do better than that. How much did you love her?
Yeah.
And they would say, well, I loved her so much, I brought her a latte from Starbucks. I'd say, well, gosh, what about when a man loves a woman, he'll sleep out in the rain? I said, come on. And I, told the ladies in the class, don't ever accept that, so there's just, that.
A latte, really?
Wow. So yeah, I think it's just that you're always after precision, the right note, the most precise way of articulating a feeling concretely. And that's why I think we love artists like Lucinda, how she could have said that, or, even, Lyle Lovett and all of the musicians that we love, even though those who aren't lyricists, and I like the lyric because it's about a moment. It's about a moment. I write narrative poems as well, and they're great, but they are great. And, there are a lot of wonderful narrative poems, but I like to be surprised. Like Robert Frost said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. And there is a moment when you're not writing the poem, and it is going to surprise you, and you want to be surprised by it. You're engaged with something that's mystical, and it's an opportunity to be engaged with something other, in a way that I don't pretend that I have mastery over what's happening. There's a lot of grace in it, so I'm grateful for that when it happens.
No surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. That's profound.
Mhm. Yeah, he was a profound guy, although he wrote very clearly. You
Uh-huh.
know, he wrote about things like, the of longing, and the poem, The Road Not Taken.
Hmm.
How, there are choices. We can only be in one place at one time. And we're always going to be wondering, because we're humans, what would have happened if we would have taken the other road? What would have happened if we hadn't taken that job? What would have happened? But you choose the one you choose, and that has made all the difference. But he uses a completely, he tethers that human emotion to something very concrete, like two roads traversed in a yellow wood,
Hmm.
and he's masterful in that, because it's plain speaking, and you want plain speaking, speaking, not so fancy, not so many adjectives, just sticking to there. I feel like the more real things are, the more mysterious they are. And so if you can actually be in the presence of something and articulate it just as it is, you're in the presence of its mystery. And then maybe you'll just start to get some connections, because we're
Wow.
all after that. Yeah, we're all after the same
We're all
life.
after connection, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do when you sit down to write a piece, where do you start? Do you have
Sometimes I'll
a
start.
general subject you're going to address, or is it a line, or is it or
It'll
does
be,
it change each time?
like I am I'm an eavesdropper, but just because I'm always listening for language that's interesting. And I
Hmm.
might hear something and write it down, hear something and write it down, or images stick with me. Like there's one that I'm really, that has always, it still looms, because it's this image in Lord Jim by Conrad, where this
Hmm.
derelict ship comes into harbor and there's no one alive on it. It's a ghost ship. And it just, you know, gosh, comes into the harbor, and it's just such a profound image for me. Or in fact, the poem, I think I read it about the, getting over a love affair that the conventional therapy didn't touch it. But I was sitting in a room one time listening to a lecture, and the blinds were drawn, and there was a shadow against, I don't know if I read it. Should I read it again? Because
Yeah, go ahead.
it's a place where that's what I started writing from, in this particular poem. And it's today I conjure your spirit where before it came on its own. This is a good sign. Your letters taken from the nightstand are now stuffed in the dark basement cupboard. They are no longer among the first things I will save from a fire. And if a small memory of you should arrive, it will be like the shadow against these dark blinds, a bird, a leaf, or some other bird. So I just thought, it's over. And it was just like, and if you should cross my consciousness, it will just be like that bird, that I don't know if it's a bird, it might be a leaf. So that struck with me. I thought, wow, what is this image? So images are, I'm always trolling. So I find one, it sticks with me. I'm trying to think, yeah, I guess that's where they all start, is this, and just the what about, and then the ones I wrote during the, and this one is called Truce. And I think I don't know, there was just this sense. In fact, we watched All Quiet on the Western Front last night, which was incredible.
Great film.
Yeah, but just armistice, that moment. And it was, and the poem is truce, like truce, a truce. No guns, but no breeze. No fists and bricks, no fists and bricks, but no birds. It's going to be dark. It's going to be black and white. And I just thought, after something like that, all the color is drained from the world. Yeah, people aren't killing each other, but what has been lost? The birds, the breeze.
Mm-hmm.
It was just this kind of, so things will come, and then, maybe I'll write it down. I write things down on paper and lose it, and one of the things that I would advise everybody to do is please, have a pen and paper beside you, because you'll wake up in the middle of the night and you will really think you're never going to forget that line, and you're always going to forget that line, and you're never going to get it back. And this is, if you want me to read this one, it's about my mother.
Please do.
And I was because how something will remind you always about something else, like, and you'll see what I mean here, especially smells and certain things. So the way the light lay white across the hospital sheet becomes a motif. Yellow roses will insinuate into symbol, as will the peripheral smell of sterilizing gel, the respirators shuddering down. A light fog stalls on the Bay Bridge to your house. Your porcelain bobby pin dish, your silk rose robe clinging to a bathroom door hook. Your faded lipstick cigarettes lying in a field of ash. Your small scrawl all across October. Your voice still on the answering machine. You have reached. So, I'd see white. I'd see a strip of light. I'd be back there, or that sterilizing gel. I just did a workshop with these for this conference. And I took in these little jars. I felt so witchy. I had a little chest. One of them was a smell. And it's interesting, the smell will bypass the thalamus in the brain, which is the judging center that tells you you can't do things and you can't think that way. But it just goes right past it. And if you've had a memory with that smell, it will come full blown. And it's such a joy to teach that, because students go, I'm right back there. How did that happen? And then from there, they can write something. It gives something off point. But if you have not had an experience with a certain scent, it does nothing. So that's intriguing to me. So I left them with a scent they'd never smelled before. Realized that they would always, if they encountered it again, they would be back in the writing class.
It'd be an association, sure.
Yeah. So, but it's fascinating to me, and I do believe that memory is most potent when it's a constellation of sensory input, like the way things looked, smelled, sounded. It will trigger these latent memories that are important, because they come back as significant. And certainly it was significant that my mother, who'd had a carotid artery surgery, very successful, but was in the operating room, in the recovery room, and someone dipped out to take a smoke, and her throat closed up, and she didn't have oxygen for 15 minutes and was in a coma for a month before it was hopeless. And so, all those 6 kids, we took turns with the vigil, and terribly, terribly sad for us, because our father was a tyrant, and, it looked like he might go first.
Right.
So, and, she could spend his money and travel and be happy, but it didn't work out that way. So it was it was very sad. It was in October. So the October light is like, there we are,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Let's take a turn to an artist that many people probably are not familiar with, but they have heard his music. somewhere along the line. We're speaking, of course, of Brian Eno. Let's cue up a piece that he did for a movie that I consider to be one of the greatest movies of all time by one of the greatest directors of all time, David Lynch, his production of Dune. Let's cue this up, and then on the backside, let's talk a little bit about Brian's work. Okay, we're back. We are here with Nancy Mitchell, who is the Poet Laureate for the city of Salisbury, Maryland. This is Delmarvalous Americana, WSDL 90.7. We are talking about Brian Eno. Your first experience with his music was roughly when?
Gosh, I'm terrible about dates. I don't remember, terrible. Somebody will say, "Oh, I know that was 1999," and I was, there's a writer. His name is Madison Smart Bell, and I think he'd mentioned him, but he in conjunction with David Byrne from the Talking Heads.
Okay.
He said, but he's really, you should listen to this. And it's called Lost in the Bush of Ghosts. And it's a recording of an exorcism. And it also, in Haiti, I think. And it also has Brian's, he's like this music that you hear, these sounds you hear in the background, in a sense, but they're triggering something else. I mean, they're very, very evocative. They're almost, they're talking to a different part of the brain, definitely. I think they really, really are. And so, yeah, I was intrigued with that because I thought, I was raised in the South, mainly North Carolina, Eastern North Carolina. All our people were from there. And there was a lot of hoodoo among Blacks there that our family owned a plantation, which later became a farm. And I was just intrigued, but because, they were powerless in a sense. So there was like, I can't decide whether this is potent or actually it was, a way that people who have no power gain power. But anyway, I was intrigued by this supernatural life in a way. It felt interesting to me because it's a lot like art. It's a lot like the process of creation. You're in it, but there's another thing. There's that third thing that you there's another two things create a third thing. When people create together, there's another thing that's created. So he just tapped into some interesting places that I hadn't thought about, and I'm always keen on that. I'm always looking for are happy to stumble upon. I guess I'm not looking for it. Stumble upon artists that are seeing things in a different way and opening up another place to think about and to experience. So, yeah, that's what I guess. I have friends who they will never listen to opera. They're like, oh, opera. They think it's stuffy. They think it's, it's not. I mean, no, it's not at all. It's just beautiful, beautiful sounds trying to like human experience, the vagaries of the human heart. So, yeah, Brian, what about you? When did you happen upon him?
Roxy Music in college. He was a member of the band. He did things with them that were not in the traditional form of an instrument, but they added so much to that work. Later on, his work with U2, I thought was nothing short. In fact, there's a song called Wild Horses, not the Rolling Stones song, but it's a U2 song that has a piece of sound that leads into the song that is nothing short of just beautiful and evocative and stirring and invigorating. It's incredible. But in the as he has progressed musically in his life, he's now making some absolutely gorgeous ambient music that if people are not aware of it, they should be, because it's absolutely a thing of beauty. However, I will say this: in order to appreciate Brian Eno, you have to kind of leave behind your traditional thoughts of what popular music is, because popular music is not what he's doing. What he's doing is music that speaks, I think, as you said, it speaks to a different part of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And it speaks to a part of the brain that wants connection, that wants feeling, that wants emotion, that wants richness. And so I was attracted to it, and I consider him to be nothing short of a musical genius.
I agree. I think he's spectacular, and always, he's reinventing. I mean,
Yeah.
he's like constantly, and it's close to jazz and blues for me because there's that moving and probing and trying to noodle out something that we're privy to in that. I mean, I like the way the blues will start out with the lyric, and then it's revising it, and then by the time that it's finished with it has worked itself out to something else. And I in exploring the blues for this radio station that I had, I was very interested in how baby was always the coding for boss. You couldn't say anything about your boss, but you could say it about your baby.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting, and it, it's that sense of having to articulate it, even if you have to code it. You have to code it, you have to say it, you have to, Shakespeare said, give Sarah words, or it's going to break your heart. It will kill you if you don't give Sarah words. So it's to articulate. And it's that Jungian premise that when you are able to articulate an emotion, it becomes something outside of you, and you can keep evolving through things that could hang you up.
I hear you. Well, Nancy, tell me what the future holds for you these days. Well, what's coming up that's of interest?
Well, I've got some projects for the Poet Laureateship that I'm finishing. I got a grant to put together an anthology of the commemorative poems that I'd written and poems that people in the city have written. Mayor Day wrote one, our former Mayor Day, and then our wonderful Mayor Jack Heath, who was just a lovely person. It's so ironic because he appointed me Poet Laureate because Jake Day was out of town, and he disclaimed, as he said, I don't know anything about poetry. I'm an engineer. And later I asked him to write a poem, and he actually said it was harder than building a bridge. But he did it. He wrote, said he's a gentleman, he said, I'll do it.
Jack is an amazing person.
Yes, he is really, we're so lucky to have him, and he's just kind of, heroic in many ways. So that's coming up. I have a manuscript that I'm working on, this fourth book, and it has to do with memory, and it has to do with, I'd like to be able to collect memories from other people. My two dear friends of mine suffered from short-term memory loss that turned into really, almost dementia. But some of their memories that they can remember are so rich and detailed to the T. So I've been having a good time with that. And then I've been, I admire people when they say, okay, I've got a theme, I'm going to be writing on the Civil War, because that gives them a lot of direction. But unfortunately, I don't and never have written like that. But once I put a manuscript out and start looking at it, I can see what it's about. Like the Out of Body Shop, I realized that that's what it was about. It was about trauma and going back to reclaim the pieces of the past, to put together the psyche again. Because when you're fragmented, when your connection, the psyche to the body is fragmented, like an electrical cord frayed and then it breaks, it's hard to live out of body. And I think it was really brought home to me after the Kavanaugh hearings and after the Me Too movement. And I mean, we're in a state of trauma. We've been traumatized by the past 5 years, 6 years, I think.
Couldn't agree
with
more.
everything. And we are in a state of trauma. And I think we're all feeling that way. And if everybody puts a big happy face on things, you can't build a picket fence around your nightmares. We've got
Nope.
to help each other articulate and get to the next. That's why community is so important. That's why a community of artists is so important. So I think it's great. And you were going to tell me some good news, or can you tell me?
Well, as a matter of fact, I can't tell you right now on screen.
Okay.
I may let's go ahead and just do an outro on this.
Okay.
Nancy, I really want to thank you for joining us today. This has been incredibly interesting, and I hope that you'll come back with us at some time in the future.
Oh, I'd love to. And it's been very interesting for me too. It's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
You are certainly welcome. This is Billy Earl on WSDL, Delmarvalous Americana 90.7. Listen, and just remember that a world without poetry just ain't hardly worth it.
I'm just looking for a four-leaf clover. I'm just looking for.
This has been Delmarvalous Americana here on WSDL 90.7 FM and streaming at delmarvapublicmedia.org. We produce this show at Delmarva Public Media Salisbury University Studio, and we get production help from Angela Semig and Brian Russo, who is our managing director. Remember, you can find this program on the YouTube channel, on Pack 14, and of course, special thanks to my guest today. Make sure and check out their music and/or art and everything they do. I'm Billy Earl, and thanks for listening to Delmarvalous Americana. And if you remember one thing from today, just remember that a life without music and art just ain't hardly worth it.